Imagine walking through this really lush old-growth forest. The air is cool, the canopy is super thick, and the soil beneath your feet is just incredibly rich and dark.
Right, it's very alive.
Exactly. It's teeming with life. Now imagine that the very soil giving life to those towering oak trees, the soil that's filtering the rainwater and providing a habitat for all those organisms, is actually, well, your great-grandfather.
It is quite the image.
It really is. So welcome to the Funeral Tale Network, and welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a concept that, it might sound like pure science fiction at first glance, but it's rapidly becoming a reality. We're talking about human composting.
Or, as it is scientifically known, natural organic reduction.
Right, natural organic reduction.
Yeah, and it's a profound image to start with, honestly, because for the listener, this asks you to completely dismantle basically everything you've been taught about what happens after we die.
Right, our whole cultural script.
Exactly. For the longest time, the end-of-life industry has operated on a very static set of principles. We rely on these preservation practices that were established, well over a century ago.
Yeah, the whole traditional burial model.
Right. So our mission today is to really thoroughly examine how and why society is currently rethinking its final footprint. We are looking at this definitive movement away from conventional preservation and moving toward a sustainable biological reintegration with the earth.
Which is huge.
It is. And to do this, we are pulling from a really comprehensive guide on the topic, which importantly includes insights and frameworks from the funeral program site.
Oh yeah, they're a great resource.
They are. They're a resource dedicated to helping families navigate and plan eco-conscious memorial options, because it's a lot to navigate.
It really is. And, the concept of a final footprint is what really grabbed my attention in the source material. Think about it. You spend your entire life trying to minimize your environmental impact.
Yeah.
You recycle, you meticulously sort your plastics. Maybe you invest in an electric vehicle, right?
Right. Or you get solar panels.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Solar panels. You consciously try to leave the world a little better than you found it. And yet, the data shows that our final act on Earth, the way our bodies are actually handled, often leaves this massive, permanent, and sometimes really toxic mark on the environment.
It's a huge contradiction, yeah.
It is. But before we get into the heavy environmental ledgers or, the emotional weight of this choice, we kind of have to look under the hood.
Absolutely. The mechanics.
Yeah, because when I first heard the phrase human composting, my mind went straight to the kitchen scrap bin.
Sure, or a pile of yard clippings.
Exactly, just tossing it out back. And I think for most people listening, the initial hesitation comes from simply not understanding the mechanics of it. How, on a biological level, does a human body turn into premium soil in just a matter of weeks?
That is the crucial starting point. Without a doubt, if you don't understand the science, the process can feel alien or even unsettling for some people.
Totally.
So natural organic reduction, which we'll refer to as NOR today, it is a highly deliberate, meticulously managed biological process. And it takes roughly 30 to 60 days.
Which is incredibly fast.
It is. The timeline alone is a major differentiator from natural decomposition out in the wild, which, that can take years.
Right.
So the physical body is placed into a specialized, controlled, and enclosed vessel, but crucially, it is not placed in there alone.
This is the part that blew my mind.
Yeah. It is laid on a carefully calibrated bed of specific organic materials. We're primarily talking about wood chips, straw, and alfalfa.
And right there is where I literally had to stop and reread the source material.
Why is that?
Because my assumption was that, to break down a human body in just 30 to 60 days, you must be introducing some kind of industrial catalyst.
I thought there had to be some super-engineered synthetic enzyme or some harsh chemical acid being sprayed into this vessel to accelerate it.
Right, a chemical shortcut.
Exactly. But there isn't. You are literally just providing naturally occurring microbes the perfect scaffolding to do the work they have evolved to do.
That's exactly it. It's entirely reliant on the biology that is already present.
Yeah.
The human body is teeming with bacteria, and our natural environment is full of microbes.
They're everywhere.
Right. So what this process does is harness that exact same microbial power that breaks down a fallen tree in the forest. But it optimizes the conditions to a degree that nature rarely achieves on its own.
It's like putting nature on fast forward.
It really is. It is an accelerated ecosystem. And that acceleration it really comes down to the specific recipe of organic materials you mentioned. The wood chips, the straw, and the alfalfa. They aren't just there for cushioning.
Right.
They are a precise biochemical formula.
Right, the carbon to nitrogen ratio. I was looking into this and it's just fascinating. It's the key to the whole thing.
If I'm understanding the biology correctly, microbes need carbon for energy, right? Like to fuel their metabolic processes.
Exactly.
And they need nitrogen to build the proteins required for reproduction. So if you just leave organic matter alone, the ratio might be way off and decomposition is incredibly slow. But here, you are artificially balancing their diet.
You're touching on the exact mechanism there. To get a microbial population to explode in growth, you need to feed them a specific ratio. It's typically around 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen.
Okay, 30 to 1.
Yeah. So the wood chips provide that massive, slow-burning source of carbon.
Got it.
And the alfalfa is sort of the secret engine of this whole process. It is incredibly rich in nitrogen.
Like a protein shake for bugs.
Exactly. It acts like a massive protein shake for the bacteria. And then the straw provides the structural integrity.
To keep it from getting too packed down.
Precisely. It prevents the material from compressing too densely, which ensures that oxygen can flow evenly through the entire vessel.
Oh, that makes sense.
So you have carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. When you combine those elements with carefully monitored moisture levels inside the vessel, the naturally occurring microbes transition from a dormant state into a state of absolute hyperactivity.
Oh, wait, this is where I need to push back a little on the logistics.
Okay, go ahead.
Because the source material notes that the internal temperature of these vessels gets incredibly high, and that heat is necessary to break things down.
Yes, very high.
But if no external heat is applied, like how does that happen? If I leave a perfectly balanced pile of wood chips and alfalfa in my backyard, it doesn't spontaneously hit 150 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right, just sits there.
Yeah. So what is happening inside this specific vessel that causes such a violent biological reaction?
It's a brilliant question, and the answer lies in the sheer scale of the microbial metabolism. We are talking about thermophilic bacteria.
Thermophilic.
Yes, meaning heat-loving. When you give billions upon billions of these microbes the perfect diet, the perfect moisture, and the perfect airflow, they begin consuming the organic matter and reproducing at an exponential rate.
Okay.
And as they consume and metabolize the carbon and nitrogen, they release energy.
Ah, I see.
Right. On a microscopic level, one single bacterium doesn't generate much heat. But when you have trillions of them working simultaneously in an insulated, enclosed vessel, the cumulative metabolic friction and energy release is just staggering.
Oh, wow.
The temperature inside the core of that vessel will naturally spike to between 130 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right.
And that is driven purely by the heat of biological life.
That is mind-blowing. The heat that breaks down the body is actually generated by the life feeding on it.
It's an incredible cycle.
It really is.
Yeah.
But that intense heat brings up a really practical issue. Let's talk about the reality of the modern human body.
Okay.
We are not just organic matter anymore. I mean, we have titanium knee replacements, gold dental fillings, synthetic heart valves, surgical screws.
Right. Lots of hardware.
Yeah. And I imagine thermophilic bacteria, no matter how aggressive their metabolism is, they cannot eat a titanium hip.
No, they certainly cannot.
So at the end of the 30 to 60 days, when this intense biological phase winds down, what happens to all that hardware?
The facility operators account for exactly that. The microbes break down everything, organic tissue, muscle, and even bone, which actually softens and breaks down significantly in that environment.
Really? Even the bones?
Yes, the heat and microbial activity break down the calcium structures. But you're right, the synthetics and metals remain untouched. So after the primary reduction phase is complete, the material is carefully removed from the vessel.
Okay.
And it's put through a rigorous screening process. This isn't just a passive sift, It's a meticulous, mechanized sorting.
To catch all those implants.
Exactly. Any non-organic medical implants, dental materials, or prosthetics are separated from the soil. And the remarkable part of this process is that these metals are then cleaned and, in almost all cases, sent to specialized recycling facilities.
No way.
Yeah, your titanium hip could be melted down and repurposed, adding just another layer of sustainability to the whole process.
That's amazing, leaving you with what the source describes as pure, biologically safe soil.
Yes, pure compost.
But let's dig into that word safe for a second, because I know a lot of people listening will immediately think of disease.
It's a very common concern, yeah.
Right. If someone passes away from a severe infection, or just, the natural pathogens present in a deceased body, how is a family supposed to feel comfortable physically handling that soil?
That is where the thermophilic heat we discussed earlier performs a vital secondary function. It isn't just about breaking down the matter. That sustained heat of over 130 degrees Fahrenheit essentially pasteurizes the soil.
Pasteurizes it. Like milk.
Exactly like milk. The temperatures are high enough, and they are sustained for long enough to utterly destroy harmful pathogens, viruses, and bacteria that might have been present in the host.
So it basically sterilizes the threat.
Right. In fact, the facilities that manage this process are heavily regulated. They must frequently test the resulting soil in laboratories to prove that the coliform and pathogen levels are virtually non-existent.
Oh, so they test every batch.
Yes. It has to meet or exceed the safety standards for commercial compost that you would literally go buy at a local garden center.
So the biological barrier to entry is completely solved. It is safe, it is efficient, and it is entirely driven by nature.
Completely.
And I think really understanding that, understanding the elegance of the carbon-nitrogen ratio and that microbial heat is what allows us to look critically at the alternatives.
We have to.
Because once you see how seamless this natural reintegration is, our current mainstream practices start to look, well, almost absurdly destructive.
Jarring is the word I would use.
Yeah. If the heat naturally pasteurizes the soil, making it completely safe, then the barrier to entry isn't biological. Yet for over a century, we've relied on traditional burials. So let's look at the environmental ledger of that tradition.
The contrast really is jarring. I mean, for generations, the standard in Western cultures has been the traditional burial. And while the surface of a cemetery might look like this peaceful green park, the reality beneath the soil is an accumulation of immense environmental debt.
It's hiding a lot.
It is. Traditional burial fundamentally operates on the concept of defying nature. It is a process explicitly designed to halt, or at least severely delay, the very decomposition we just talked about.
And that defiance really starts with embalming.
Yes, it does.
Now, I think people know embalming involves chemicals, generally speaking.
Yeah.
But we really need to understand the chemistry to grasp the environmental impact.
We do.
From my reading, embalming fluids are heavily reliant on formaldehyde. And this isn't just a mild preservative. It's a known carcinogen, and its entire chemical purpose is to cross-link the proteins in human tissue so that bacteria cannot break them down.
Precisely. You are actively poisoning the microbial environment to prevent the natural cycle. We are pumping gallons of these highly toxic formaldehyde-based solutions into the vascular system of the deceased.
Gallons of it.
Gallons. And those chemicals don't just magically disappear. They sit in the earth. Over decades, as caskets inevitably degrade, those toxins run a severe risk of leaching into the surrounding soil and potentially contaminating local groundwater.
That's terrifying.
You are taking a biological entity and essentially transforming it into a toxic asset.
And then we put that toxic asset inside a casket. And we aren't talking about simple pine boxes anymore.
No, rarely.
We're talking about heavy-gauge steel, copper, or exotic woods that have been treated with varnishes and sealants. They're lined with synthetic fabrics.
Right.
But the part that always shocks me is what happens next. The casket doesn't even touch the dirt.
No, it doesn't. And this surprises a lot of people. To maintain the aesthetics of the cemetery specifically, to ensure the ground remains perfectly level so that industrial lawnmowers can easily pass over the graves without the earth settling or caving in the casket, is placed inside an outer burial container.
A vault.
Yes. This is typically a massive vault made of reinforced concrete, steel, or thick, non-biodegradable plastic.
If you pause and visualize that, the scale is horrifying. We are taking acres and acres of arable land and permanently filling it with underground bunkers of concrete, heavy metals, and toxic chemicals.
It's true.
We are essentially building subterranean landfills dedicated entirely to halting the natural cycle of life. It's an incredible amount of resource consumption for something that serves absolutely zero ecological purpose.
It is a profound misallocation of resources. And, it's that realization that has driven millions of people over the last few decades toward what they believe is the environmentally responsible alternative.
Which is cremation.
Exactly, cremation.
Right. And this is exactly where I had to check my own assumptions. Because for the longest time, I assumed cremation was the eco-friendly choice.
Many people do.
Yeah, my logic was simple. It saves space. We aren't dedicating acres of real estate to concrete vaults, so it must be better for the planet. When you look at the physics and the fuel requirements detailed in the research, you realize we are just trading ground pollution for massive air pollution.
The space-saving argument is valid, of course, but the carbon footprint of cremation is staggering.
Tell me about it.
To reduce a human body to ash through flame, a cremation retort, which is the industrial furnace used in the process, It must be heated to roughly 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
2,000 degrees.
And it has to maintain that extreme temperature for 2 to 3 hours.
Let's just put that in perspective for the listener. Heating an industrial oven to 2,000 degrees for 3 hours requires an enormous volume of natural gas.
An immense amount.
I read that a single cremation consumes roughly the same amount of fuel as driving a standard car halfway across the United States.
Exactly. Now multiply that by millions of people who pass away and are cremated globally every single year.
Unthinkable.
The emissions are astronomical. We are pumping millions of tons of carbon dioxide directly into the atmosphere. And it isn't just carbon dioxide.
Oh, right, the fillings.
Yes. If the deceased had older dental fillings, the intense heat vaporizes the mercury, releasing heavy metals into the air. There are also particulate matters and other chemical byproducts of combustion. So while cremation solves the real estate problem, it is actively accelerating climate change and contributing to atmospheric pollution.
Which makes the case for natural organic reduction incredibly compelling.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you lay the ledgers side by side, NR essentially solves both sides of the environmental crisis.
It really does.
It completely bypasses the land use issue of traditional burial. You aren't permanently occupying a plot of land with concrete and steel. But it also completely circumvents the carbon emission issue of cremation.
The energy efficiency is what makes it revolutionary. By relying on the thermophilic microbes to generate the heat, the facility's energy footprint is just a fraction of a crematorium's.
Because the bugs are making the heat.
Exactly. The process uses minimal electricity. It's mostly just for the climate control of the building itself and the occasional mechanical rotation of the vessels to ensure aeration.
Right.
There are 0 harmful chemicals used and 0 fossil fuels burned for the physical reduction. It is carbon sequestration in action.
Carbon sequestration.
Yes. Instead of burning the carbon in the body and releasing it into the atmosphere as gas, the process traps that carbon in the resulting soil.
It's a total paradigm shift. I mean, we are moving from defiance and destruction to surrender and regeneration.
Beautifully put.
But yeah, let's get down to the practical reality for the family. We've bypassed the chemicals and the carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
The 60 days are up. The material has been screened for titanium and pasteurized by the heat. What does the family actually walk away with?
That's a great question.
Because when someone is cremated, the family receives a small urn. You can put it on a mantle. With human composting, what is the tangible output?
This is where families often need a moment to adjust their expectations because the volume is significant.
How significant?
The process yields roughly 1 cubic yard of premium nutrient-dense soil.
1 cubic yard. To visualize that for you listening, if you had a standard pickup truck, 1 cubic yard of soil would basically fill the entire bed of that truck to the brim.
It's a lot of earth.
That is a massive amount of earth.
No.
How does a single human body generate a tricklet of soil?
Well, you have to remember the recipe we discussed earlier. The resulting soil isn't just the breakdown of the human body.
Right, the alfalfa and stuff.
Right. It is the composted synthesis of the body, plus the massive volume of wood chips, the alfalfa, and the straw that were initially placed in the vessel.
Oucha.
The biomass of the plant material makes up the majority of that final cubic yard. It is a very rich, loamy compost that is incredibly fertile.
But practically speaking, what on earth does a grieving family do with a pickup truck full of soil? I imagine most people don't have the backyard space to accommodate that, nor would they necessarily want to keep all of it.
No, the sheer volume requires families to think differently about the disposition. And the facilities offer several avenues for this. Families have the right to take all of the soil back, of course, but it's really rare that they do.
I would imagine.
Usually, a family will choose to take a small portion of it, perhaps enough to fill a few large planters or to spread in a specific meaningful spot in a private garden.
Like planting a rose bush or something.
Exactly. They might use it to plant a memorial tree in their yard. For the remainder of the soil, the facilities have established partnerships with conservation groups and protected land trusts.
Oh, so the soil is actually put to work on a macro scale.
Exactly. This isn't soil that gets dumped in a landfill. Because it is so nutrient-rich, it is highly sought after for ecological restoration.
That's incredible.
The soil is taken to protected forests to help replenish clear-cut areas. It is used to nourish depleted wetlands, stabilize hillsides to prevent erosion, or revitalize damaged ecosystems. The family knows that their loved ones' remains are actively contributing to the healing of the planet.
Think about the psychological shift that represents for you as a listener. If you are planning for your own end of life or navigating the loss of a parent, You are forced to reevaluate the whole concept of a legacy.
It changes everything.
It does. We are so culturally conditioned to equate legacy with permanence. We buy a plot of land, we carve a name into a block of granite, and we think this is how they will be remembered.
But granite weathers.
Right. Cemeteries are eventually forgotten. What human composting offers is the profound concept of a living legacy.
A dynamic ecosystem rather than a static stone. It completely changes the grieving experience. Instead of visiting a silent, manicured lawn where the relationship feels definitively ended, a family can actually walk through a conservation forest.
Wow.
They can look at an oak tree or a patch of wildflowers and know that on a literal biological level, the person they loved is nourishing that life.
They're part of it.
They are. They are providing the nitrogen for the leaves, the carbon for the roots. It transforms death from a hard stop into a continuation.
It's the ultimate confirmation of the law of conservation of energy.
Yeah.
Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It only changes form.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
For many people, knowing that their final act will be one of giving back to the earth, of becoming the foundation for new life, it must bring immense peace. But, while the science is elegant and the environmental impact is undeniably positive, human beings are incredibly complex creatures.
We are.
We need ritual.
Yes, we absolutely do. Anthropology shows us that every culture in human history has developed specific rituals around death.
Right. For thousands of years, our grieving process has been tied to very specific tactile actions. We have the wake, we have the viewing, we physically gather around the grave to watch the casket be lowered into the earth.
There's closure in that.
Exactly. There's a psychological closure that comes from witnessing the physical disposition. My concern, and I'm sure a concern for many listening, is that this process sounds a bit, clinical.
I hear that a lot.
The body goes into a steel vessel in a warehouse, the doors are sealed, and a computer monitors the oxygen levels for 60 days. It's incredibly efficient, but it feels devoid of human warmth. How do families grieve, celebrate, and find closure when the method is so drastically different from our cultural norms?
That is perhaps the most vital aspect of this entire conversation, because the science of natural organic reduction is flawless, but science alone does not heal a grieving heart.
Right.
The most important concept for families to grasp is the separation of disposition from commemoration.
Okay, explain that distinction for us.
Disposition is the logistical, physical management of the biological remains. It is what happens to the body. Commemoration is the emotional, social, and spiritual act of honoring the life that was lived. For the last century, traditional burial forcibly intertwined those two things. You commemorated the person by physically standing over the body during the exact moment of disposition, the lowering of the casket.
They were the exact same event.
Right, but they do not inherently have to be linked in time or space. Choosing human composting for the disposition does not mean you have to abandon the rituals of commemoration.
So you can adapt the tradition to fit the new science. You don't have to choose between being eco-friendly and having a meaningful funeral.
Exactly. There is total flexibility, and facilities are highly attuned to the emotional needs of the families. A family can still hold a traditional viewing or a beautiful memorial service before the body is ever placed into the vessel.
Really?
Yes. Many facilities offer specialized laying-in ceremonies. The family can gather in a beautifully designed space. They can physically help place the organic materials, the wood chips, and straw over the body.
Oh, so they are part of the process.
They are. They can include personal organic mementos inside the vessel, letters written on untreated paper, specific flowers from a home garden, or even a favorite cotton shirt.
That brings the tactile, participatory element back into the grieving process. You're still actively caring for the deceased.
You are. And the ritual continues after the 60 days. When the soil is returned, families often hold deeply moving, scattering ceremonies. And this is exactly where the resources highlighted in our research, specifically the funeral program site, becomes so critical.
I was going to bring them up.
Because when you are navigating a disposition method that is entirely new and unfamiliar, the familiar touchstones of a memorial service become even more important to ground the family.
Yeah, I was looking at the materials offered by the funeral program site, and it really clicked for me. We need physical artifacts to anchor our grief.
We do.
A beautifully printed memorial program, a structured order of service, a photo collage that tells the story of the person's life. These things don't become obsolete just because the body is being composted rather than buried. If anything, having those tangible, familiar elements helps bridge the psychological gap.
Precisely. Organizations like the Funeral Program site prove that we can craft deeply personal, highly structured, and emotional tributes that run parallel to the biological process.
It's the best of both worlds.
It is. They provide templates and guidance that allow a family to say, the physical body is undergoing a natural transformation, but our love, our memories, and our need to gather and share stories remain exactly the same.
That's so important.
You can still have the readings, the music, the eulogies, and the beautifully designed printed programs that guests can take home as keepsakes. It ensures that the emotional and psychological needs of the survivors are met just as thoroughly as the environmental needs of the planet.
It's about evolution, not erasure. We are keeping the heart of the ritual while updating the mechanics to reflect our current values.
Very well said.
Okay, so we've established that the science is sound, the environmental benefits are massive, and we have the tools to ensure the emotional rituals remain intact. If I'm listening to this, I'm probably thinking, this is incredible. Why isn't this the standard everywhere?
The million-dollar question.
So let's pivot to the pragmatics. What are the actual roadblocks preventing natural organic reduction from becoming the default choice tomorrow?
The pragmatics are where utopian ideals hit the brick wall of our current societal infrastructure. There are three major hurdles we have to analyze here: the economics, the legal landscape, and the deep-seated cultural inertia.
Let's start with the cost. I think that's what people want to know first.
Yes, let's look closely at the numbers.
The research indicates that human composting currently costs anywhere from $3,000 to $7,000. Now, if I play devil's advocate for a moment here,
Go for it.
if this process is literally just relying on cheap wood chips, alfalfa, straw, and the free labor of thermophilic bacteria, why on earth does it cost up to $7,000?
It's a fair question.
I mean, it seems like something that should cost next to nothing, right? It's dirt and bugs.
It's a completely fair critique, and it's a sticker shock that a lot of people experience initially. It sounds like you are just paying for dirt and time, but what you are actually paying for is a highly specialized, capital-intensive infrastructure.
What do you mean?
These facilities are not just barns with piles of dirt. They are sophisticated warehouses that require intense climate control. The vessels themselves are engineered to perfectly manage airflow.
Oh, right.
And the facility has to run specialized HVAC systems to handle negative air pressure, ensuring that no odors escape into the surrounding neighborhood and that the internal environment remains perfectly balanced for microbial growth.
I hadn't considered the air handling.
Mhm.
You're basically renting premium, climate-controlled, technologically monitored real estate for 60 straight days.
Exactly. And that time factor is the biggest driver of the cost. Think about the throughput of a crematorium.
Yeah.
A single retort can process 3, 4, maybe 5 individuals in a single day. The overhead is spread out.
Right, high turnover.
Exactly. But a composting facility is committing a massive vessel, the square footage it occupies, and the daily monitoring by specialized staff to one single individual for up to 2 months.
Oh, wow. Yeah, when you put it like that.
You are paying for the daily lab testing of the moisture and oxygen levels, the mechanical rotation of the vessel, the meticulous screening process for medical implants, and the strict adherence to health department regulations.
When you frame it as intensive care for soil, the price tag makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
But how does that $3,000 to $7,000 range
Mhm.
compare to the alternatives?
It positions human composting firmly in the middle. Direct cremation, where there is no service, no embalming, just the immediate physical reduction, is still the cheapest option, often running between $1,000 and $2,000.
Okay.
But NUR is significantly less expensive than a full traditional burial.
Oh, easily.
When you start adding up the embalming fees, the markup on a heavy steel casket, the required concrete vault, the purchase of the cemetery plot, the opening and closing fees for the grave, and the granite headstone.
It adds up fast.
It does. A traditional burial routinely exceeds $10,000 to $15,000. So economically, Inorio is a highly viable middle ground option for families who want environmental sustainability without the massive financial burden of a cemetery plot.
Okay, so the cost is justifiable and competitive. Let's talk about the laws, because this is where the bureaucratic reality gets incredibly frustrating to me.
It is frustrating.
If the heat pasteurizes the soil, if the laboratory testing proves it is biologically safe, and if it solves the carbon emission crisis of cremation, why is this only legal in a handful of states? The source mentions Washington, Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, and California. Why isn't this legal nationwide right now?
Because changing the law regarding human remains requires moving mountains of bureaucracy.
Of course it does.
The legal definitions of what constitutes a legal disposition of a human body were written decades, and in some states, centuries ago. The legal framework was strictly binary. The law explicitly defined burial, and the law explicitly defined cremation.
So it wasn't even on the books.
From a legal standpoint, human composting simply did not exist. There was no box to check on the death certificate.
So it isn't necessarily that lawmakers looked at the science and banned it. It's that the legal lexicon literally hadn't been updated to acknowledge its existence.
Precisely. And pioneering a new legal category is arduous work. Washington State was the true pioneer here. Advocates, scientists, and entrepreneurs had to spend years doing the heavy lifting.
Wow, years.
Yes. They had to run extensive pilot programs with universities to conclusively prove the safety of the thermophilic breakdown. They had to draft entirely new regulatory language regarding the handling of the soil, the zoning of the facilities, and the environmental standards.
They were starting from zero.
Washington essentially had to write the rule book from scratch.
And once Washington proved the sky didn't fall and that the process was safe and dignified, other states had a blueprint to follow. It makes sense that states with historically strong environmental platforms like Colorado, Oregon, Vermont, and California were the first to adopt that blueprint.
Yes, and the legislative momentum is building. Every year, new bills are introduced in various state legislatures across the country. But it is a slow process that requires local advocates to continuously educate lawmakers who might be entirely unfamiliar with the science.
Which brings us to the final, and arguably the most difficult, roadblock. Cultural inertia.
Psychological barrier.
Exactly. You are asking families to navigate and dismantle deeply ingrained personal, cultural, and religious beliefs. For generations, the funeral industry has equated the preservation of the physical body with respect for the dead.
Is how we show we care.
We use language like final resting place. We seal loved ones in vaults because the cultural narrative told us that protecting the body from decay was the ultimate act of love.
We've pathologized decomposition. We view it as a failure or a desecration rather than the most natural, essential mechanism of life on Earth.
And overturning that narrative requires a massive paradigm shift. Presenting an option where the body is intentionally, rapidly broken down and transformed into soil challenges some of our deepest societal taboos.
It really does. For certain religious traditions, the physical integrity of the body is paramount to their theology, making composting an unacceptable option. But for others, the ecological focus aligns perfectly with spiritual mandates to be stewards of the earth, leaning heavily into the ashes to ashes, dust to dust philosophy.
It really highlights a crucial piece of advice from the source material: the absolute necessity of preemptive family discussions.
Yes, do not wait.
If you are listening to this and thinking, this is what I want, you cannot leave that decision as a surprise in your will. You do not want your grieving children trying to comprehend the thermophilic breakdown of alfalfa and wood chips in the chaotic days following your death.
It is the greatest gift you can give your family: clarity. The text strongly advises researching the local laws in your state and laying the groundwork with your family right now.
Have the talk.
Have the talk. You need to explain the why. You need to articulate that you want your final footprint to be a regenerative one. You need to express that you find comfort in the idea of a living legacy, of becoming the soil that nourishes a forest.
It's so much easier if they know.
If you provide the philosophical and emotional context while you are still here, it relieves the burden of choice from your family later.
Bringing all of these threads together, the science, the environmental ledgers, the rituals, and the laws, we are looking at a society in the midst of a profound evolution. We are trying to reconcile ancient human needs for mourning and memorialization with very modern, urgent ecological realities. We are being forced to reevaluate what it actually means to honor a life.
It is a fundamental shift from a model of isolation to a model of integration.
Integration, I like that.
For a century, the goal was to lock the body away, separate from nature. Natural organic reduction offers a highly sustainable, deeply meaningful alternative that reasserts our place within the ecosystem.
We're part of it again.
By transforming the physical body into nutrient-rich soil, it actively supports environmental health. It doesn't just minimize the harm of carbon emissions or toxic chemicals, it actively creates a tangible benefit for the planet.
It is a net positive end to a life.
It is, and beyond the hard environmental metrics, it offers an incredibly powerful symbol of life's continuation. It is vital that listeners know these options exist and that they utilize trusted resources like the guidance and templates from the funeral program site to navigate these new choices, ensuring that their final acts truly reflect the values they held in life.
It is just wild to step back and think about the journey of this deep dive today. When we started, the idea of human composting sounded radical, maybe even jarring.
A bit weird, yeah.
But when you systematically break it down, when you understand the elegance of balancing carbon and nitrogen, when you realize the microbes do all the heavy lifting naturally, and when you look at the stark contrast between the toxic debt of a concrete vault and the life-giving potential of a cubic yard of fertile soil, it ceases to be science fiction.
It becomes common sense.
It actually feels like the most logical, ancient, and beautiful thing in the world.
It is a return to our biological baseline, but facilitated by modern scientific understanding and intentional design. It beautifully reinforces the reality that we are permanently interconnected with the Earth, not separate from it.
It really does. And, it leaves me with this one thought that I cannot quite shake, and I want you, the listener, to sit with this today.
Okay.
For millennia, human civilization has been largely defined by our attempts to resist the natural world. We build massive concrete vaults. We pump our bodies full of harsh, toxic chemicals to halt decay, almost in absolute defiance of time itself. We try to build these permanent monuments that scream, I am apart from nature, I will not change.
Right.
But natural organic reduction flips that entire philosophy on its head. What does it say about our evolution as a conscious species? That the ultimate modern act of grace might not be fighting to preserve our bodies forever, but finally allowing ourselves to surrender, to dissolve, and to peacefully disappear back into the ecosystem that gave us life.